Welcome to Fortress of Faith with Tom Wallace, calling North America to repentance and revival.
Well, welcome back once again to the Corner of Truth and Courage. And if you've been listening to any of the news, we're seeing attacks against Israel by Hamas, by Muslims there in the Gaza Strip, an area that has been controlled by pretty much by what often would be called radical Islam. And I want to explain to you that's not radical. Radical would be something that is outside of the norm, but something that's fundamental to the core teachings of a doctrine is not radical, it's just fundamental. I'm going to replay to you a program that I did back when we were on American Family Radio. I had Shahram Hadian as a co-host with us, a former Muslim from Iran who came to Christ. It's one thing to hear about Islam from a missionary, but it's another to hear it from a former Muslim who came out of it. And he and I are talking over the next 3 days of what we call the 10 steps to radicalize, or a better word would be to fundamentalize, a Muslim. How to make them militant. What drives Muslims to do what they do? Well, we're seeing attacks against Israel by Muslims, these rockets, and this has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. 1,400 years of history of Islam has been bloodshed, and they seriously mean it. The destruction of the Jews of Israel. They can't stand it that Israel has that land, and they keep claiming that they have stolen the land from the Arabs. Well, the Bible tells us clearly it belongs to the Jews. So listen to this, the 10 steps. We'll get into 3 of those steps here today, and I hope it'll be a blessing to you and a help to understand some of the violence that's going on in the Middle East. Here we go. Shahram, let's start laying into these 10 steps of how to fundamentalize a Muslim. Now,
Yes.
Shahram, at the very beginning of Islam, you have the 5 pillars of Islam. And the first pillar is the Shahada. I mean, this is really the beginning step of anything that deals with Islam. And the Shahada is the creed of Islam. And it goes like this. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Now, this leads us to the first step. The first step is this, that it needs to, if you're going to radicalize a person who wants to become a believer in Islam and wants to be faithful to the teachings of Islam, and he's going to eventually become a jihadi, here's the first thing you need to establish. You need to establish in his heart, in his mind, that Muhammad is God's final prophet.
Yes.
Isn't that true?
That is absolutely true. And the reason we've put in the word there, not just a prophet, but the final prophet, is because the fundamental difference between Islam and every other belief system in the world, specifically Judaism and Christianity, is the fact that Muhammad claimed he was summoned by God, Allah, to bring the final message. And so that's why the Shahada, which makes a person a Muslim. So if as a non-Muslim person were to pray that prayer, they would technically become a Muslim because you're acknowledging that there's one God who they believe to be Allah, and that he has a final prophet. And Muhammad's message must be the final message. Therefore, it refutes Judaism, it refutes Christianity, it denounces every other belief system, and it makes Muhammad the final messenger. Therefore, Tom, this leads into the second point, which is that if Muhammad is the final messenger, then the Quran, so here's point number 2, establish the Quran as God's word, Allah's word, and the Sunnah, which means in Arabic, the practice. The Sunnah are Muhammad's teachings and actions. So again, number 1, Tom, if Allah is the only God and Muhammad is his final messenger, that means whatever he says goes, right? I mean, that's the only way you can interpret that.
Yeah, I mean, he's speaking for God. He is God's spokesman here. God has revealed to the prophet his message. And Muslims To understand the Quran, Muslims will turn to the Sunnah to look, how did the Prophet live out the message? What did he say, and what did he do? This is called the Sunnah. Now, the Sunnah is made up of two resources. One resource is the Hadith. Now, the Hadith, there's many collectors of Hadiths, but the one that is well received amongst the Muslim community around the world, that's like the Texas Receptus, so to speak, okay, would be the Bukhari Hadiths. There are 9 volumes. Then in addition to that, you have another source, which was written by Ibn Ishaq, the Sirah. And so these are the words and the teachings, the life of Muhammad. And so Muslims don't only look to the Quran, which are the words of their God, but they also look to the words of their prophet. And so you have to put these two into perspective.
And this is where there is a division, even, Tom, within the so-called Muslims in America that claim to be the peaceful Muslims. We've covered this before, this sect of Islam. Really, it's a cult of Islam called the Ahmadiyya, where the Sufism, this idea that there's this peaceful Islam. What they do is they say, well, we reject much of the Sunnah because we follow the Quran. And even then, they follow an unabrogated version of the Quran, not the actual abrogation. But again, go back to point one. If point one is Muhammad is God's final prophet, and his revelation is the revelation, that means that whatever he did, whatever he said, however he acted, is how Muslims are to live and act. So when there is any question of interpretation of the Quran, they go to the secondary sources, the Sunnah, and therefore now they're looking at, okay, well, Muhammad did it, and since he's the perfect man, right? I mean, the Quran says Muhammad is the perfect man, therefore they're supposed to follow. So really, again, the point being, those who claim to be peaceful, tolerant Muslims who want to reject many well-established Sunnah, hadiths and sirahs, particularly in the Bukhari, particularly in the Sahih Muslim, they are the ones who are outside the orthodoxy. They're the ones who are not scriptural. Point number 3, Tom, now the third step into fundamentalizing or radicalizing a Muslim is that they have to establish that Allah is the only God of the universe, the sole God of the universe, and his law, which is the Sharia that many of our listeners have not heard, his law, the Sharia, are perfect and good law for all of mankind. It's the only law that can really be followed. And this is a big point of contention, isn't it? Because there's many Muslims in America who will claim openly, no, we don't want the Sharia. We believe that we can be pluralistic, yet we know that's not consistent with Islam and with, again, point 1 and 2. Let's talk about that. In fact, groups like the Muslim Brotherhood for years have been saying, we don't want the Sharia in America, yet we see that they are moving towards that push. Why is this so important, Tom?
Well, it's got to be essential to them. You ask a Muslim, and I did this when I was in New York City here just recently, went down the street asking different Muslims while I was trying to interview them. Not many wanted to be on tape doing this, but they still would talk with me. And I would ask them, so tell me, can you separate the Sharia, the law of Islam, can you separate that from Islam? And most of the people I was talking to were, quote unquote, moderate Muslims. They were out actually clubbing. so they weren't really, there was a bar they were standing out in front of, not far away. I was standing in Little Egypt over there on Steinway. And so, but still even the moderate Muslims would tell you, you cannot separate the Sharia from Islam. There's no way you can do that.
That's right.
And so there was a survey done not too long ago, Shahram. I'll have to look for that. We'll put it in our notes. But I remember about a year ago they came out with this, that over 50% of the Muslims here in America now are saying, we want Sharia law here. And that was shocking because, we didn't see a lot of that. And you're right. CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, used to be out there saying, we don't want Sharia here. But every time we try to make laws to keep Sharia out, they're right at it, fighting us tooth and nail. And so they've shown their true colors. haven't they?
That's
you
right.
know, that they do want Sharia, and
right.
they're calling for it openly.
And really, Tom, this is the critical thing that we have to understand, is that there's a lot of focus on denouncing jihad. We even have quote-unquote Muslim reformers like Zuhdi Jasser and others who will say, well, we denounce violent jihad. But if you actually ask them the question, is the Sharia to be implemented? The answer, if they're going to be a devout Muslim, has to be yes. The Sharia, as you just said, cannot be separated from the rest of Islamic life. That is why folks on the show here, and when Tom and I speak, we reference the Reliance of the Traveler, that book, which is case law of Islamic law. It is the what's the word there? When you compile something. Compilation? There you go. Sorry, English is my second language.
We'll forgive you.
Thank you. The compilation of 1,000+ years of case law, of rulings of what is consistent with the Sharia and what is not. And we will grant that even Muslims can disagree on maybe some nuanced aspects of the Sharia. Obviously, the Islamic State today, Tom, claims that they are Islamic and came out with their 10-page justification of them being the Islamic law. And maybe there are some Muslim scholars that would argue about certain nuances. But on the majors, on the points that we are making here, the Sharia clearly establishes that Muhammad is the final prophet, Islam is the final message, the Quran is the final testament. In fact, the Sharia is what teaches that the Quran is the final testament. Not the Bible, not the New Testament, but the Quran is the final testament, and therefore Sharia must be implemented. And let's make this point before we go to point number 4. Sharia, there is no separation of what is religious and what is civil. In our laws here in the United States, we have a separation of the fact that which is religious cannot be forced upon people. It is a choice. Doesn't mean that the church should not be involved in politics or government, but it means that it can't be forced upon. We can't legislate Christianity in the aspect of saying, well, I'm going to force you to convert or I kill you. But in Islam, that's what it teaches. So therefore, there is no separation, and that's why I think the survey you were talking about, Tom, was the Center for Security Policy survey that they did.
That's right.
Where they had asked a question, and 20, I think it was 25%, if I remember right, of those Muslims surveyed said, if it takes violence to implement the Sharia, we're all for it.
Yeah. That was very concerning, that survey, when that came out. Well, folks, that's going to be it for today. The clock is running out. Tomorrow, when we come back, we'll cover more. We've covered 3 of 10 points, 3 of 10 steps. So tomorrow we'll cover more, but you can go to our website at fortressoffaith.org and get our notes for today, or go to last Saturday's program and get all of the notes and take that program and share it with your friends. Share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter. Get this news out. People need to know this information. God bless you. We'll be back again tomorrow.